Hey everyone, I'm Bill Hilton and welcome to the first tutorial in my intermediate piano course. As you may know, I already have a 21 lesson beginner's piano course right here on YouTube, and this course is going to be a follow-up to that one. Now that doesn't mean you have to have been through my beginner's course to do this course, because you absolutely don't. You might have had piano lessons in the past or taught yourself from a book or another online course, and now you want to move on and make progress with your piano playing. That's great. This intermediate course will absolutely suit you if that's the case. In this first tutorial, we're going to do two things. First, we're going to check your basic skills, just so we know we're all starting in the same place. Then we're going to move on and start learning a brand new piece. Before we get started, something I should say is that this whole series is going to be a pretty big undertaking for me, just like the beginners series was. So it would be absolutely fantastic if you could support what I'm doing here. There are a few ways you can do that. The first and easiest is to make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel. Just hit the red subscribe button and also the all-important bell notification icon so you get updated every time I release a tutorial. You can also support me via my crowdfunding page at patreon.com/BillHilton. Now, supporting me on Patreon comes with a whole load of benefits, not least access to my piano packs, which are full of extra exercises, original pieces and stuff to do to improve your piano playing. And each one has its own step-by-step walkthrough video. These piano packs are going to be absolutely perfect for intermediate players like you. Now, I put the first piano pack live on Patreon just a couple of weeks ago as I speak. It's October 2020 right now, and it's already proving massively popular. The feedback is really good. So if you want to get hold of that piano pack and later piano packs, plus get a load of other exclusive benefits, head over to patreon.com/BillHilton and sign up right now. The other thing you can do is check out some of my books, especially How to Really Play the Piano, which you'll like if you want to find out how to improvise and play blues and pop and learn about chords and stuff like that. There are links to the sales pages for all of my individual books in the description text below this video. If you're watching on mobile or a tablet, you might just have to tap to expand to see that text. Okay, let's get down to business. First off, we need to make sure that we're all starting in roughly the same kind of place. So I've made a checklist of the stuff you need to know, or at least be familiar with, to work through this course. And you'll find that checklist in the PDF document that accompanies this tutorial. You can download that PDF by using the link in the description text right underneath this video, or by heading over to billspianopages.com/intermediate. In that PDF, you'll also find a bunch of scales and exercises that you need to be working on, even if you can only play them slowly for now. They're all scales and exercises that we covered in the beginner's piano course, or if you've had piano lessons in the past or you've worked through another reputable piano course, they're all scales and exercises that should be familiar to you. What I've done for some of the trickier ones especially is reference them with links to the tutorials in the beginners series where I first explained them. So if you find yourself getting stuck, go back to those tutorials in the beginner series to check that you're getting them right. With all of this stuff, with all the scales and exercises, all of the knowledge that I want you to know, don't panic if some of it is a bit rusty, or if you need to revise some of it, check some of it, whatever. Yeah, part of your homework for this tutorial and the next one, and probably the one after that, is to get all of this stuff up to speed. We're not going to rush into loads of new knowledge. We're not going to rush into loads of new scales and exercises for the first tutorials. Okay, let's get on and make some music. Here's the piece we're going to be working on in this tutorial and the next one. It's called Chacon, and you'll find the score for it in the PDF. Today we're going to be working on the first 16 bars, but I'm going to play through the whole thing just so you can get a sense of what it sounds like. If the second half sounds a bit complicated, a bit tricky, don't panic. It's actually not as difficult as it sounds, and also I'm going to be playing it maybe a little bit quicker than I'll expect you to play it, just to save a little bit of time. Okay, here's Chacon. Let's have a listen. Okay, so I hope you like that. If you want to actually see what my hands are doing on the keyboard, I've included video of me playing the piece without the score on the screen right at the end of this tutorial. I strongly recommend you have a quick watch of that, but don't refer to it in detail unless you get really stuck on a particular section and you want to see what I'm doing. In general, it'll do you much more good to work from the score and figure things out for yourself. So in this tutorial, we're going to look at bars 1 to 16, measures 1 to 16 if you prefer the US terminology, and that's this free and easy section in 2/2 time, before the livelier waltz section that starts in bar 17. Yeah, that's that bit, and we're going to deal with that next in the next tutorial. We're in the key of F major, and we know that because we've got one flat in the key signature, a B flat, and a major kind of sound rather than a minor kind of sound. Okay, check out tutorial 9 of the beginners series if you need a refresher on key signatures. Next to the key signature, we've got the time signature, which tells us we're in 2/2 time. Let's just refresh our memories on what that means and how I know that. This symbol here, the C with the vertical slash through it, means play the piece in 2/2 time. I could just as easily have written 2/2, just like I could use a C without a vertical line to mean 4/4 time. It's just a convention, yeah, and I've put it here so that you'll know it again when you see it. What 2/2 time means is that each bar, each measure contains 2 beats, and that each beat is a minim or a half note in length. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Yeah, I could just as easily have scored it in 4/4 time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, but when I play it, the pulse I'm feeling is falling much more naturally towards 2 beats in the bar, so that's where I've gone. Now, as you probably noticed when I played it through, this piece is in anything but really strict time. That's because I want to give you a chance to practice your expressive skills here. The tempo instruction at the top tells you to play it slowly and flexibly, largo e rubato. Largo basically just means slowly, though it also carries a sense of playing it broadly and maybe in rather a stately way. Okay, I was playing rather at the quick end of a largo actually, so by all means slow it down from the tempo I was playing it at. Rubato is just the Italian word meaning robbed. It's short for tempo rubato, which is robbed time, and strictly speaking it means robbing, stealing time from one bar and adding it to another. But in practice, and especially in modern practice, rubato really just means play around with the timing for artistic effect. Speed up, slow down, linger on sections, pause, whatever you like. Rubato isn't necessarily an easy skill to master, so we'll be talking about it more in the second tutorial in the series. Now, the tempo changes throughout this piece, okay? There are several changes of tempo, and our first one comes in bar 9, where we have this marking poco meno mosso. That's all that means really is slow down a little bit, and all I want you to do there is to just give those quavers, those eighth notes that start in bar 9, just a little bit more room to breathe. Yeah, so we've started off at a reasonable, or at least that's the speed I played it at, but then when we get to bar 9, I just want you to give it just a little bit more breathing space. Yeah, so those quavers, those eighth notes are still quicker than the quarter notes, the crotchets I was playing in the first 2 or 3 bars, but the overall tempo has just slowed a little bit. Really important point, these tempo markings, in fact all of the markings, all of the dynamic markings, are a starting point for you to create your own interpretation. Yeah, that's what a professional pianist would do if he or she looked at this. He or she would take those tempo markings as guidance, yeah, a starting point. So feel free to vary from what I've done. What I don't want you to do is come up with a performance of this that sounds exactly like mine. I want you to make it your own a little bit, because that's what musicianship really is all about. In terms of the actual notes you're playing, there is nothing massively challenging up until the end of bar 16. Depending on your existing skill level, it might take you a fair bit of work to piece together exactly what's going on, but that's absolutely fine. Take your time on that. As I've said, we're in the key of F major, so every B that is written in the score is played as a B flat unless you're told otherwise. There are also several accidentals, sharps and flats, introduced into the score, like this C sharp in bar 5 and this D flat in bar 6. And yes, I know that those two are the same note on the piano keyboard, and there is a good music theory reason for scoring one as a sharp and one as a flat, but I'm not going to go into it here, okay? We'd be straight down a music theory rabbit hole. Anyway, you probably know this, but as a reminder, accidentals hold their force only for the bar, for the measure that they are in, and they can be cancelled at any time by a natural sign or another sharp or flat sign, okay? Now, in a couple of places, I've put in courtesy accidentals, which are just reminders. Sometimes they're in brackets and sometimes they're not, for reasons that are far too boring to go into. But for example, to give you a couple of examples, I've put this natural sign in bar 7 to remind you that the D that was flattened in bar 6 isn't flat anymore. You're just playing it as normal. That's just a reminder. There's also quite an interesting courtesy accidental in bar 13, where we've got this C sharp in the left hand chord, and I just wanted to show you that the right hand C definitely stays natural because the dissonance, the clash between them, is deliberate. I've tried to be as clear as I can about the fingers you need to use. The overall effect I want you to aim for is kind of easygoing, kind of light touch. Yeah, I want legato, I want smoothness, but as far as you can, try to get away from being really welded to the keys. It needs to feel free and relaxed without being too sloppy. And it'll probably take you a fair bit of practice to get there, okay? That's absolutely fine. There are a couple of tricky little bits you just need to watch out for. For example, in the left hand of bar 3, where you have this D and the A with the thumb and the third, 1 and 3, and you have to put your thumb under to the C. That might take a little bit of separate hands practice, so just have an eye on that. Keep an eye as well on the phrasing in the right hand. Remember, if you have a phrase mark going along more than 2 notes, that means you need to play it as a smooth phrase with a distinct start and a little kind of breath or catch at the end before the next phrase or whatever happens next begins. Yeah, so we've got a good example of that in bar 12, actually starting right at the end of bar 11 in the right hand. Okay, can you see how we've got a phrase mark over those notes? So we try to play it as a single coherent phrase. But then we have a little break before we start the next phrase. If a phrase mark is just going across 2 notes, then it's a slur, which implies kind of a pressure release kind of emphasis. So if we look at bar 9, just let me play bar 9 just from the start of the phrase at the end of bar 8. Can you see that C and the D there? Just there's a little phrase mark across the 2 notes, and that is a slur. My old piano teacher used to say, slur it, slur it. And that's a useful thing to do if you want to make your slurs work properly. There were just 1 or 2 other little things I want to point out. So for example, we've got quite a few stress marks in the piece. If you look at bar 15, there's a stress mark, a little kind of chevron type thing above that chord in the right hand at the start of the 2nd beat. All that means is that you give those notes an extra little push, okay, an extra little stress. Okay, it can be really, really subtle if you want. Then straight after that, we've got that vertical wiggly line. That's an arpeggiation mark, and all that means is that you slightly spread out the notes of the chord that follows it, bottom to top, like this. Rather than playing all the notes at the same time, you just arpeggiate that chord where you've got the wiggly line arpeggiation marking. We also have several fermatas throughout the whole piece. Fermatas are pause marks. So for example, here in bar 8, we've got a fermata there. And all that means is that you pause, you hold that note a bit longer than it's written for, and kind of have a little kind of a catch of breath before you go on to whatever's written next. You'll also notice that in a few places we've got more than 1 voice per hand. Now that technique is covered in detail in tutorial 15 of the beginner's series. It's about 9.5 minutes into that tutorial. But briefly, this is where some fingers of one hand hold notes while others play different notes, or when things get more sophisticated than they are here, when one hand is playing more than one melody line simultaneously. So we've got a good example of it again here in bar 8, where we've got the thumb and the second in the right hand playing this low G and B flat down on the ledger lines and holding them for a minim, a half note, while your fifth and third play the F and D above. Okay, and they're crotchets, quarter notes. So we've got one part of the hand doing one thing, holding down the G and the B flat, while the top half of the hand plays two notes up there. Voices are usually pretty clearly defined by stem direction. So as you can see, the stems on the held minims are pointing down, showing that they both belong to the lower voice, while the upper voice stems on the F and D are both pointing up. There's an interesting left-hand example of different voices going on in bar 14. If you look at it, we've got this low D and then this chord up here a quarter of a beat later. Then the two voices come together again in the second of the bar's 2 beats. Now, obviously, you can't hold this D with a finger down here and play this chord at the same time. Even if you've got the biggest hands in the world, that just ain't happening. So what do? Well, you use the sustain pedal to stick the sound together. Okay, it's not marked, but in this situation, any piano player looking at this score would just expect to use the pedal, as in fact they would expect to use the pedal throughout this piece. What I want you to do for now with the sustain pedal is just experiment with it, see how you can use it to stick the sound together and give the whole thing more presence, and then we'll talk about pedaling in more detail when we get to the next section of the piece in the second tutorial. How long should all this take? I'd say you've got a lot on your plate with this tutorial, with all the scales and the piece. So for most of you, this is probably going to take a minimum of 2 weeks practice, assuming 20 minutes a day, 6 days a week, and depending on your prior experience. It could quite easily take longer than that. Don't worry if it takes longer, don't worry if it feels like a struggle. It's supposed to, because it's by struggling that we make progress. If you don't seem to be making any progress after, say, a month, assuming you're practicing regularly, then give me a shout because I might be able to help you. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. Remember, if you want to watch me playing through Chacon, hands on the keyboard, stick around because you'll be able to see that as soon as I finish talking in a minute or two. The next tutorial will be out in a few weeks' time, so watch out for it. In fact, make sure you don't miss it by subscribing to my channel and hitting that little bell notification icon to ensure you get updates every time I release a new tutorial. When the second tutorial goes live, I'll add a link to it in the description text of this one, and as soon as the first 2 tutorials are live, I'll create a series playlist. Please do remember what I said at the start. If you can support me on patreon.com/BillHilton and or by buying some of my books, that would make a massive difference to my ability to produce these things. And remember, if you support me on Patreon, you get loads of bonuses like access to the piano packs and priority help and support. Check out my crowdfunding page at patreon.com/BillHilton for more details. Okay, so download that PDF if you haven't already and get practicing. I'll see you next time.